Testing. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Brandon, and I'm from the Singapore Economic Development Board. In a nutshell, my role here is to help tech companies here in the Bay set up, expand, and invest in Singapore. And what I want to do today is give you a broad context and a couple of reasons why you should be coming to Singapore. I think it echoes a little bit broadly what Richard said earlier, the access to people, capital, and knowledge and ideas. But before I zoom in on Singapore, I want to start with a broader context in the region that Singapore operates. Now, when I meet companies and tell them about Singapore and Asia, they usually assume that all the growth in Asia is in one of two regions, China and India. And while that's definitely true, that both those markets are huge and growing, I'm here to tell you that there's one more region that companies should be paying attention to, and that's Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is a collection of 10 countries, including Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Now, why do I say Southeast Asia is interesting? Well, there's a report out there by Google and Temasek that you can find online, and it presents a pretty compelling case. I want to share a couple of data points. Sorry, I don't have any slides with me, but first data point is that Southeast Asia's population is currently 600 million people. That's a large addressable market if you're a tech company. On top of that, and unlike some other growth markets in Asia and the rest of the world, close to 70% of that population is under the age of 40, meaning they're young, they have high disposable income, and they're tech savvy. Again, that's a good value proposition if you're a tech company. And combine those two data points together and some of the other kind of evidence in the Google report, and that translates into a $200 billion opportunity in Southeast Asia's internet economy by 2025. And that's excluding high growth sectors such as healthcare, education, entertainment, and financial services, which Google just didn't have the data for. In other words, Southeast Asia is a huge region and it's growing extremely quickly. The additional I suppose reason that's compelling for Southeast Asia is that unlike other growth markets, we haven't seen the emergence of a clear winner in any one space, from e-commerce to ride-hailing. And for example, Amazon and Alibaba only made big moves in the region last year, and Richard talked a little bit about Uber in Southeast Asia. Uber is actually in the midst of exiting Southeast Asia, and it's selling its business to a regional unicorn called Grab. So what that means is whether you're a company based in the US or anywhere else, whether you're a startup, a growth stage company, a unicorn, and anything and beyond, now is a great time to come to Southeast Asia before the competition is heating up, before the dynamics have kind of cemented, and carve out a niche for yourself in such an exciting region. Now, I want to move on from Southeast Asia and talk about Singapore specifically. Now, you might be thinking, why Singapore and Southeast Asia? It's a really small country, and that's true. We have a population of 5.5 million people. That's smaller than the total population here in the Bay Area, in an island smaller than the entire city of LA. So why would Singapore be interesting? Well, the interesting thing is actually Singapore is quickly becoming what I like to call the digital capital of Southeast Asia, Asia, and beyond. Why I say so is that on one end of the spectrum, over 27% of startups in Southeast Asia are actually based in Singapore. And that's in spite of us having less than 1% of the total population of Southeast Asia. On the other hand, close to half of the unicorns in Southeast Asia have substantial operations or teams in Singapore. And it's not just business operations, but engineering, data science teams, and other activities. And even beyond that, we're seeing brand name tech companies, the likes of Google, Alibaba, Facebook, IBM, SAP, and others, all again have substantial business and tech operations in Singapore. So the question you might have on your minds is, why would these companies ever want to come to Singapore? And kind of to make the question a bit more direct, why would you as a company want to come to Singapore? And again, to echo Richard's excellent framework, I think there are three compelling reasons. The first is access to talent. So Singapore has over 200,000 tech and media professionals today, and we graduate about 2,000 tech and media professionals every year. Now, honestly, that's not a large number compared to what you're seeing here in the US, in China, or other parts of the world, but because we know it's a small number, we try to invest in deep tech capabilities in this talent pool, including skill sets in AI and data science, cybersecurity, the Internet of Things, and immersive media, basically AR, VR. So that's why we're seeing companies such as DataRobot, a small tech AI startup set up an engineering team in Singapore, and even bigger companies such as Google, Symantec, and other cybersecurity AI companies also set up significant engineering teams in Singapore. Now, beyond local talent, we also have a transparent and efficient process for applying for an immigration visa. We call it an employment pass. So if you were to think about sending talent from abroad into Singapore, the process is quite smooth. Now, moving on from talent, the other proposition that we have is access to funding opportunities. Now, another information or data point from the Google and Temasek report is that over 40% of all venture deals flow through Singapore. And that's on the private sector side. On the public sector side, the government has a system of broad-based incentive support for startups at any stage of their company, from seed stage to growth stage. And that includes not just broad-based tax relief if you're profit-making. It also includes a system of different loans, grants, equity funding, or equity matching schemes that you can find on the website startup.sg. Now, I've talked about talent and I've talked about access to funding, but the third reason that I think is a bit counterintuitive is that Singapore gives you access to scale your business in the region. Now, you might be thinking, why access to scale in the region? It's a really small country, small population, not the biggest consumer market if you're a tech company. Well, I'm here to say that in spite of our small size, I think we have a couple of interesting opportunities for companies to consider if they were thinking about setting up a business in Southeast Asia and Asia. The first is a process that's called government accreditation. Now, if you're familiar with FedRAMP here in the United States, accreditation in Singapore is similar. It gives you green lane access to a range of government tech projects across the public sector. But beyond giving you access to government projects, it also gives you a Singapore government stamp of approval that you can then take to potential clients in the private sector and assure them that your technology passes a certain grade or passes muster. And in fact, companies who have been accredited by the Singapore government have gone on to set up data science and engineering teams in Singapore and said that they've been able to build their project pipeline not just in Singapore, but the rest of the region, thanks in part to the government accreditation process. Now, the second initiative for scale is something we call the Global Innovation Alliance, or GIA. Now, there's a lot of things going on in the GIA, but the thing that you should know is that we're building a physical network of innovation and startup hubs across other tech hubs in the region and beyond. For example, we just announced the setup of a Global Innovation Alliance Center in Bangkok. We have one in Jakarta, we have one in Beijing, and we actually have one here in San Francisco in South Park. It's called Block 71 San Francisco. What this means is if you're a company taking part in GIA, you have access to a network of mentors, companies, contacts, and physical spaces in US, China, and Southeast Asia. And again, that's a great value proposition if you want to come to Singapore. Now, the final kind of initiative that I want to talk about is actually a collection of different initiatives. It's a range of spaces for you to experiment and play around with in Singapore. And what I mean here is that if you're a company looking to scale or test a specific technology or solution, there are many ways for you to do that in Singapore. For example, if you're a company in the business of manufacturing or operating unmanned aerial vehicles, you can come and take part in Singapore's drone district in the southwest corner of the island. It's right next to our dedicated autonomous vehicle test bed district as well. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're a FinTech company looking to, for example, build a solution on the blockchain, you can apply for to our central bank to be part of what we call the FinTech sandbox, which allows the central bank to relax a range of regulations to allow you to experiment and play around with a kind of new innovative solution in the FinTech space. So there's a lot more details and a lot more initiatives. I wish I had a bit more time, but just in short, Southeast Asia is a compelling value proposition. Singapore as your access to talent, access to funding, as well as your path to scale and growth in the region. Well, the last thing I want to leave you with is there's nothing like going down to the region and experiencing the opportunities for yourself. So I highly encourage you to come to Singapore, take a look at the tech sector, see what's going on. If you have any questions or if you'd like to have a conversation, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can go to the website edb.gov.sg for more information. I look forward to speaking with all of you going forward. Thank you very much.